It is 1 o'clock on Monday, the 16th, if I got the date right, of June. I welcome everyone, May, not June, not yet, joining us for this budget update workshop. Doy a todos una bienvenida a este taller sobre actualización del presupuesto. And before we actually start, I just want to check, we have Maria Negas checking in remotely. Can you hear us, Maria?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you, Martin.
Good, glad you're here, and make sure we notice when you need to speak. And Laura Jakes will be here within a minute or so, I believe.
You want to? All right. So with that, Jeanette, you want to start us through the process?
Yes, we'll go ahead and get started. Wait for the presentation to get queued up here. Okay, so today we are here talking about two very important components of the budget. So enrollment, which is our primary revenue driver, and staffing, which is our primary expenditure driver. I didn't think it was supposed to do that. Oh, push and hold it. Maybe exit and do it like we did before. Can you close it? Okay, technical difficulties, we got it. Okay, so just a reminder, again, a budget is a value statement. So some of the things we're going to be talking about later are going to tie back to our strategic plan and our big 6 initiatives. So just a reminder of those. And the priority with the budget, you know, the budget goes throughout the strategic plan, but one of the big connections is the priority and the partnerships within the community. So the first component is enrollment. So the first thing we're looking at here is birth rates. So birth rates impact the district with our future kindergarten classes, as we all know. So as you can see, the by birth year, the blue bar is the county birth rate data. And then the red line and the red numbers are the corresponding year when those students would enter kindergarten, what our actual kindergarten count was. So as you can see, for the most part, our trends are pretty well aligned with the county data. So there's not really any big deviations. You know, when the county data goes down, our data goes down. When the county data goes up, our data goes up as well. The one anomaly with that is in the 2018 birth year is when those students would have been entering kindergarten in 2020. So that was an impact there. And you guys can see that right there in the 2021 year. So as you guys can recall, we started remote in 2021 and then phased into hybrid and then in person. So as you guys can see, for the most part, the trends hold pretty true when you're looking at the school year comparison. And so we're looking at births September to December in the prior calendar year, and then January to August in the next year, so we can align it with our school year. One thing to note as well, so starting in 26 or from 2016 to 2017, the birth rates actually went down. That was also the year, 2017 is when we started getting less detailed information from the state. So before, we were able to get really detailed information that included the births that were within the city of Wenatchee, specifically separate from the county, and then also month by month how many births there was. Starting in 2017, we're only able to get yearly totals and only county level totals. So it does kind of change the way that the data is reported. So we're basically forced to just look at trends, which for the most part are probably still accurate, but they could have changed, especially with COVID. So I'm playing phone tag with the county to try to get that updated information. On the state website, the latest data is 2019. So they don't have any data from 2020 or 2021. So I'm working on trying to get that so we can have some more accurate information. So like I said, in 2017, those rates did go down, but then they did bounce back up a little bit. And I believe, obviously without seeing the data, I don't know for sure, but I do believe over the COVID timeframe, those rates probably went up a little bit as well. So we'll see. So interestingly enough, those students that were born around 2017, 2018 timeframe are the students that are now entering our kindergarten classes. And so having that data and having it as detailed as possible is going to be really important for us to try to anticipate how many kindergarten students we're going to potentially be seeing through our doors.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Since we had that lull or the lower enrollment in 2020, did we see any, I can't remember to your slide, did we see any additional increase in 2021 to 22 then for those that held back or didn't?
Yes. So interestingly enough, it wasn't overwhelming. We actually kind of just basically went back to what we normally were seeing percentage wise. So it wasn't, you know, oh, we saw 102% of the births that we would normally see. So it was just basically back on trend, which is interesting. Some of those parents might have also chosen to just go straight into first grade. But again, we didn't see overwhelming first grade numbers either. So it could just be, you know, a lot of people moved in and out of the valley at that time too. So.
So Jeanette, do you have any way of measuring those folks that are relocating either in or out of the valley and how many school-age children they might have in their families?
We can look at the number of students that unenrolled and our new students that enrolled in the district. So we can pull that data. We track all of that. But as far as, you know, students who are younger, you know, before kindergarten and those families moving in, we would not have any way to track that.
Okay.
Another big piece of enrollment projection is looking at cohort survival. So basically what this is it's looking at a grade band of students and tracking their progress through the system and looking at, you know, from year to year, is that class going up or is that class going down? So as you go from first grade to second grade, historically, does your district see 102% of enrollment, or does your district see 80% of enrollment? Do you lose students in that time frame? So that's one thing we definitely look at. As you can see here, for the most part, the trends are really similar other than first grade. being a little bit different. But other than that, generally they follow kind of the same trend line in the first grade through fifth grade bands. We don't track cohort survival for kindergarten because that's just your birth rate data. Yeah, well, and you can see too, I mean, all of our, in 2020, 2021, all of our first through fifth grades dropped, and then all of them went back up. But the kinder or first grade did go up by more than it did in the other grades, but not significantly more. Oops. There we go. Again, that same level of analysis for sixth grade, seventh grade, and eighth grade. Again, as you can see, those decreases in 2021. And then you can see the sixth and seventh grade also decreased a little bit going into our 21-22 school year. Those are the two grade bands that Pinnacles Prep has currently. And then next year they will have sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. So we might see a little bit of a decline from sixth grade again.
And that would also be the beginning of Pinnacles Prep to some extent in the middle school, right?
Yes, yeah, that's what I was just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to turn your mic on? Oh.
Jeanette?
Yeah.
Do you know if Pinnacles Prep is functioning to capacity with the two current grades they have?
I cannot speak to their capacity, but I did hear today that the counts that they currently are anticipating for students from Wenatchee School District for next year is lower than what was projected by myself. So I believe that we're pretty good on that front.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Do we have any data or demographics on the students that have left or are leaving, or is there any tracking of that information to better understand who they are, so we can understand why they're leaving, why they've left?
Yeah, so when a student unenrolls from the district, we do try to get that information. If they're going to another school district within the state, all of that is actually tracked within the state system. And so we're able to see like, oh, we got a request from Seattle School District or something. So they're moving over to the west side. So we can kind of gather that. And we do encourage our office staff to try to get some information from parents as well that we keep track of in that same state system.
Is that something that you're going to share with us? Maybe, for instance, the number of kids that left public school to go to the private schools that are local?
Yeah, we can definitely look at that. From what I can see, it's not really overwhelming. It's not necessarily the reason why we're experiencing decreased enrollment. I mean, Pinnacles Prep is probably the biggest one, and they're expanding. So that's kind of a natural thing. And they're within our school boundaries. So that would, be expected that we would lose the most students just because of the location. But we can definitely look at that and see if it's, something that is telling to us. But generally from what I've seen, because I've looked at it previously, especially last year when we had the huge enrollment decline, and it was just all across the board. So it's kind of challenging to see a trend,
Yeah, those numbers will be interesting to see who's left the public, and particularly, who they are, so that we can begin to understand why they left and hopefully address it.
Mm-hmm. So these are the trends for the 9th through 12th grade. So the yellow looks a little scary, but the reason for that is that's the year that students are able to enroll in a running start. And so that's why that number kind of looks like that. We also received a pretty big uptick in running start enrollment in 2021 due to being online. So we had a lot more students choose to go that direction than normal. So as we talked about, our birth rates are declining. Again, that might be different with the 2020 and 2021 birth rate data. But previous to that, our birth rates were declining. So we can expect that trend to pass through in our kindergarten classes in the next couple of years. Again, once we get to maybe 2 or 3 years out, that might look a little bit different, but we'll just have to wait and see. Also, our graduating classes are larger than our kindergarten classes that are coming in. Again, that's just based on the data that I have right now. So when you have classes that are graduating that are bigger than your incoming classes, you're naturally going to see your school district size shrink and your elementary school size shrink. And as those grades that are larger, which is really our secondary grades right now, we're going to see that kind of trickle through our system. So that'll be something we'll just have to monitor going forward. So this is our projected enrollment for the next 4 years. So in the 21-22 column, again, that's current year. And then in 22-23 is the projected. And then I'll just point out the obvious, the 25-26 column on the far right, you see the kindergarten number of 187. That's just reflecting, I don't have that second birth rate data for that second year to get a full picture of what that looks like. I will have that when we do the next budget presentation, hopefully, but I don't have it currently. So, but as you can see, the size of our elementaries is going down, the size of our middle schools are going down, and the size of our high schools are going down as well. So you can just kind of see that, again, that natural trickle effect of those smaller grade levels going through our system, and then also compounding Pinnacle's prep opening and those impacts trickling through our system.
Looking diagonally, they're all pretty consistent numbers, and you can see the 5th to 6th diagonal as the one that stands out.
Yep. Yeah, and again, I projected 40 students because I anticipate we might have some students in maybe 7th and 8th grade that are choosing to go to Pinnacle's prep next year as well in the next coming years. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what that number actually comes out to be. You might have to click on the presentation. Oh my word. Can you maybe just click? Okay, we're going to move into staffing, hopefully. There we go. So we'll start off with certificated staffing. So you guys can see here the budget from last year. And again, that is strictly from the budget that was approved by the board. And then the budget as it is right now for this next school year. So you can see there's a lot of movement within the budget. So one of the biggest things is we are expanding our CTE career technical education offerings at the middle schools and at the high schools. So there is a lot of movement within this staff between basic ed and then moving those staff to CTE. Because once those courses become a CTE course, the staffing follows that as well. And so does the funding. So we're really matching up what type of course it is, where is the enrollment going to be reported, where's the money going to flow in, and then assigning that staff member to that category as well. So that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of change between the 01 BEA, it's the basic ed, and then 31 through 45, which is CTE and this tech center as well. So that's probably that is the biggest change within the budget. We also net reduced about 3 classroom teachers. And we added a nurse at the high school and 3 behavior specialists throughout the system. And the nurse and behavior specialists are funded through those increased staff units from the legislative House Bill 1664. And we also added 1 special ed secondary math coach to support the work at the high school and then the middle schools as well. Like I said, the CTE positions are funded through those increased course offerings and then also the existing course offerings as well.
Jeanette, if you're going to get to this later, don't answer me now, but it'd be interesting to know, if you look at the 21-22 numbers, how many open positions there are. And I assume that your budget is budgeting fully staffed. Is that correct?
Yeah. So do you mean that? So how many open positions there were in 21?
Unfilled positions. I mean, let's say you're at 97% full budget staffing now, and you're budgeting 100. It's that kind of mathematical relationship I'm curious about.
Yeah, if we're looking at next year's staffing, I don't know off the top of my head. I know we have a number of open positions, and I'll continue to budget those until we know whether or not, are they going to continue with them? Are they going to want to do something different? Those kinds of things.
No, that makes sense to budget 100%. It's
Yes.
just that when you look backwards afterwards, the amount of vacancies will matter.
Yeah. Well, and it'll matter when we're looking at actuals and looking and seeing, okay, why do we have extra budget in one category or another? A lot of it has to do with those open positions. Yeah. So looking at the classified staff. So again, we had that safety security coordinator position that we added during the school year. That was a change from the budget from last year. Again, CTE, those positions are funded through their existing staff unit or student FTE, so their existing funds and or their new funds. So that is a good change. And that is at the middle schools, the high school, and the tech center. So the tech center actually added a para this school year to support the work in one of their programs. Again, we're also offering increased intervention support. So really focusing on that intervention time. Also, as we were talking about open positions, there was, a number of positions that during the transition from my predecessor to me and during COVID, those positions weren't filled. And so I think there was kind of an assumption that maybe they didn't need to be replaced. So they weren't budgeted last year. But once we got back to full-time school and everything, those positions were needed and they did need to be replaced. And so we did honor that. And those positions were all paid for with the existing funds. So there was not any tap onto the fund balance or anything like that. They are funded with food service and transportation funds, which fund both of those programs sufficiently.
So thinking about the bigger picture, I'm wondering if this is a localized trend of decreased enrollment, or is the state seeing that as a whole, or our North Central Washington region, or the United States?
the state definitely is experiencing decreased enrollment. I was just recently at a state conference, and any district that said our enrollment is up got the death glare. Because that was not the feeling of most of the room. And I believe that I've heard nationwide, it's actually more of a trend. I don't know if Washington's experiencing more so than others. That very well might be the case.
It
But
would be interesting to have some data on that. Also some data around the population size of our region in general, because it feels like, you know, our population is increasing. And so
where are
Who's
the
making that
students?
up?
what's the correlation
Yeah, what-
between increased population and decreased enrollment?
Yeah, what's the demographics
Seems
moving in?
odd.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
Similar to Jeanette, the superintendents just regionally are experiencing the same thing that we're seeing. So from the smaller districts to the Eastmont, Wenatchees, we're seeing similar trends across in numbers and that decrease. But good question on the
And
demographics of who's
demographics.
coming in. who's-
And what are the homeschool numbers? You know, are those really increasing? What are the factors that are playing into this? Because I'm curious to know what, if anything, we can do about it. If not, then fine, but if so, then we should.
Why? Or not enrolling in the first place if they're moving over but not engaging.
Our population has increased notably, and yet we're seeing such a, still seeing a decrease. So that's significant.
Also wondering, are our WIA numbers included in our FTEs? I didn't see that on the chart. Well, I didn't think to look, actually.
Yeah, they are included. They're all, everything is included, all the alternative learning and everything.
And I understood that WIA has really decreased in their enrollment. Or is that still being looked at I mean, what are we doing with that?
Yeah, it definitely is still a year-to-year conversation. So the anticipated enrollment for next year is quite a bit lower. So we modified their staffing to reflect that as well, similar to like what we did with the other buildings.
Do you know a number of when they were their highest enrollment to now what they're going to be next year?
I mean, their highest enrollment during the peak of COVID was a lot. It was well over 400.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say it was even pushing 6.
Yeah, we were at one point we're about 650 was kind of our max number.
Yeah.
And we've significantly dropped, and it's why Jeanette has said, this is definitely a year-to-year piece. We felt like definitely one more year, but board, cabinet team, we're gonna have to make some decisions about the long-term livelihood of that program, because we've reduced the number of staff who are at WIA as well this year, Jeanette and Kelly and Mike.
What's the enrollment now? Do you know?
So the enrollment now is roughly 190. And next year I anticipate that to be closer to 100 and 110, 100, something like that.
Yeah, if I remember right, I think even last year's budget, we had it projected to not be operating by end of 2023. And then it was kind of, enrollment was still strong this year.
Yeah.
Interest was still strong this year. So we kept it kind of going on that year-to-year trend, but
Yeah. And just so the board knows, so what we did to kind of gauge how many students we could anticipate for a WIA next year is we asked the families a month or so. Well, it was probably 2 or 3 months ago now. But we asked them kind of what they're thinking and what their plans were for next year so that we could determine what we wanted to do as far as staffing goes.
Do we know any demographics or anything on those folks? Who and why and I mean, are they
Why do they?
right? And is
choose?
it a continuous need that they're going to see throughout the whole career of the kids, or I mean, the school career of the kids, or is it something that it was solely COVID related and now is just convenient or because they're still in it?
Yeah, I think generally for the most part, we might see these kids stay through. You know, we waited until after the COVID restrictions lifted and that kind of thing, so we could see, because we thought, well, maybe when masks come off, maybe we'll see some enrollment go back to the buildings, but we didn't. And WIA's enrollment this year has actually increased slightly from the start of the year. So, you know, it's interesting to kind of, it's not really something we can put into a box at this point. You know, we're trying to get the best information that we can so we can plan. But the high school is one of the interesting components. There's a lot of students that actually really like the Apex system and doing online school. So our numbers at the secondary are 60, and I'm kind of anticipating 50 or so for next year. So
I'm thinking that we all always need to have some kind of online component to education, because, you know, there are some students that simply do better in that environment. The majority are fine, you know, being in person, but there are some who do better there. So I feel like our district always needs to offer some kind of option. That said, early in the pandemic, we talked about as a board how instruction was going to change and evolve as a result of the pandemic, that we would provide, we would develop and new ways of teaching and learning, and that you know, our system would change as a result of that. So I'm wondering if we're seeing any of that now, or are we just going back to the way things have always been done without carrying any innovative instructional methods forward?
Ron and Mike were here. I think they'd be able to answer it at a deeper level, but going back to your first one, I think there is a small subgroup of students who definitely do better in the online environment. And that's going to be something that the board cabinet, we need to, what is that number that makes it work for the grade levels? Because we're already doing multi-grade level teaching, which becomes more challenging if we have to add greater bands to that teacher to be able to grab, you know, first through third. Is it first through fourth? So that's one of the components of WIA that we've navigated, especially at the elementary level. Well, no, I shouldn't say that, because it's also a little bit at the middle school where people are having to do multiple topics in grade levels.
yeah, the middle school does multiple grade bands, but we do have specific content teachers. So we have a science teacher, a math teacher, and a core teacher.
So that's one of the components to keep in mind around WIA, that it's, if the numbers continue to decrease, it's going to be hard to staff it just from a physical standpoint of how many people can actually teach that many grade levels or that many bands. From the instructional side of things, I do believe we have become better with the instruction, especially with the technology around using our technology. And that's a big piece that Ron and others have talked about. How we've invested millions of dollars in the technology from federal funds, mainly is where most of those funds came from. But we're having those conversations. How do we continue to support our educators to use them more so than just a notepad, the old fashioned notepad, and really trying to bring those pieces forward. WIA continues to do innovative pieces with it. The Apex that we talked about for high school continue to work for some students. The larger overarching aspect of what we're doing, I would say it's the work around our structured literacy, the work we're going to be putting into place around mathematics is really where we're putting a lot of our time and energy of really transforming that type of teaching and learning to where we're at.
I'd be very curious to know how their grades are, how the students are, you know, if they're excelling, you know, how are they doing? I'd like to know are they just coasting along in this
WIA or
WIA?
Okay.
What they're, you know, how each actual student is doing in each class, or is it just something that we're offering and people want to do it because they don't want to go to school, and are they ho-humming their way through it and not excelling at it?
We can get those for you.
Yeah, I think one point on that is, so the ALE and alternative learning experience is different than the basic ed experience in that there is more accountability on the students as far as grades and that kind of thing goes, and participation and showing up, because there are rules around, if you don't show up so many days, then you get dropped. If you aren't meeting academic progress, then you potentially can get dropped. So there are different benchmarks in place for those students. And there is actually, in some cases, like parent contracts and that kind of thing too. So it is a little different, actually quite a bit different. It's very highly audited. So, you know. Yes.
Yeah, they're not excluded from any of the state testing or state or district testing.
With everything you just mentioned, it sounds like they're almost being held to a higher standard or than.
ALE. Yeah, ALE. There's a lot of requirements for the parents, for the students, for the staff.
It's
to
way
be
more
on track.
personal.
Yes.
It's more personalized, which is a good thing. But so when we invested so many of our federal dollars in technology, at the time, we didn't really have discussions that I recall about the sustainability of that investment, because with tech comes maintenance. And so are we planning for that in our current budget?
So that's a piece that Jeanette and Ron work on a regular basis. So we got this huge influx of dollars, you're right. But the next bigger question is, okay, careful with that gift, because you have to sustain that over time. How do you upkeep it? And how do you create a sustainable plan? Because you're never going to be able to drop another, whatever the dollar amount was. I'm going to just say $5 million at a problem on 1 year. It's going to have to be a little bit over time to do the replacements of it. So that's something that Ron and Jeanette have been working on.
Yeah. So Ron and I do talk about that, and we talk about that in the context of staff devices as well. Really making sure we have a good refresh cycle and we have it really mapped out and planned out. And that's one of the bonuses, I guess, about our, we've been phasing in these device purchases for students as well. Number one, it's aligned with when we receive funds and when we're eligible for receiving funds. But also once those funds go away, that gives us a little bit more of a natural refresh time. But it's also, evaluating what types of devices do we need? How many devices do we need? What does it look like? 1 year, 6 months before the pandemic, none of us really probably saw that coming either. So who knows what 5 years down the road things are going to look like and what we're going to want to do. But that's definitely something we talk about. And that's one of the bonuses about having the long budget, right? The 4-year budget is we can start to look at those changes moving out. And I know, I believe it was in last year's budget, there was already either last year's budget or the 2021 budget. There was already a plan for investment into technology as well. So, it's not a new concept. But it is changed. It's very different. So it's definitely something we're going to be looking at in the next several years.
It was a plan for discussion, but it wasn't approved. Because one of the things the board has looked at over time is, what is that ongoing maintenance? Because you need tech support, you need updates and upgrades and all that kind of stuff. But so we do need to think about that in a real thoughtful manner.
Just last piece on that one, Laura. One of the things that Jeanette's doing with all of her departments is making sure that we have they have a 5-year budget that actually addresses those different aspects. So there are not surprises. So we can see, it's hard to see much further than the 5-year aspect, but that's an ongoing rolling piece where she's having those conversations with each of the department heads who oversee a large budget to say, okay, where are we going now? Where are we going to be? And are you thinking about those types of things? So we're not surprised. So that is going on.
I also know that budgetarily we've had to defer, that the likes and wants of the tech department are different than the reality of the dollars in the bank. So, we have in the past deferred those things and had people, working on devices that were due for a refresh at, 3 or 5 years and still operating after 10. So now we have that exponentially increased. But that sort of leads me to my next question in a way, in a recent article that came out, I think from NSBA, they were talking about learning loss over the last couple of years. And I don't think that, we can deny that, learning loss has occurred, but some districts chose to invest some of the CARES money into tutoring and individualized instruction for students. And, maybe we've already decided where that money is going, and maybe this isn't the right place to talk about it, but I'm wondering how, learning loss recovery is structured into this budget plan, if it is.
It's a great question. So we did offer tutoring this year, and we did partner with our after school program to accomplish that as well. So we used CARES funds and our 21st Century grant funds. So we did have that this year. The plan is to hopefully continue that in some fashion for next year. I will be quite honest with you guys, the staff is pretty burnt out. So it's been a challenge to staff those programs, but it's definitely a conversation that we're going to be having for next year is what does that look like? We also have 21st Century grants that are expiring and we are currently in the application process. The application I think opens in the first part of June. So we're going to be applying for that and we're going to be actually writing the tutoring component into it to hopefully make that a continuing part of that program. For those students. And then, really having conversations with the principals of what does that tutoring and that kind of thing look like for next year. Also, the changes with the intervention model, that really, to me, that's probably where we're going to get the best bang for our buck because our students are in our buildings and they don't have to, have after school support and that kind of thing, which can kind of be a challenge for families just depending on their situation. So, those, I'm hopeful that those changes are able to help our students.
I think those are huge. So it's the combination of all the things coming together to really do a nice job from our PLCs, our teams really thinking about students on the individual level to the group level to the larger school level to ensure that we have really high quality instruction occurring each day around structured literacy, around the implementation of the math practices that will be going into place next year, making sure that we're in coaching, the coaching support for our, especially at the elementary, making sure that we have that solid foundation for our students. But then again, having those extra pieces of tutoring, we're hopeful. It's been in some schools, it's been received a little bit better than others, but there are still students receiving the tutoring support after school. So we'll see where that goes from next year. But I think it's the bigger picture of the intervention that we talked about. It feels like a month, 2 months ago that we had that on there. That to me is one of the biggest changes that we're doing. That's really going to see high volume of students having that experience who may be struggling a little bit more in either math or literacy.
Thank you for making that connection. That's a good answer.
And actually, I'd like to want to make an awareness comment at that point. It's all people in the budget often say, oh gosh, I've got to control my costs and not spend money I don't have. But people will also say that the biggest mistake in a budget is not to spend your money. And, I think I want to add, when I asked about open positions, I do once a week show up for after school. I think our toughest place where we have the most vacancies is in that after school tutoring. And that is a national environment that we're going to have to struggle with. So in one sense, but it doesn't alter that it's a priority. I just want to bring it up because that's a very real performance area where we will have a challenge. We've got to work really, really hard and just want people to be aware of it.
Yeah, definitely a great point. Wenatchee School District is hiring for anyone who's listening. Please go to our website for any open positions. Okay, so moving forward, when we're looking at staffing, so as I presented previously, we do have a staffing model that we're using now. So really looking at making sure our staffing reflects our enrollment. So if we're experiencing an enrollment decline, looking at our staffing to make sure that we're not overstaffed in one area or another, and we're not understaffed in one area or another. So really looking at that. And, you know, we will always continue to analyze either new positions that are requested or positions that are vacated, and having those conversations with the administrators. If that position's really needed, is it needed in the same way it was needed before? What does it look like? Those kinds of conversations, and really tying it back to the funding and tying it back to the strategic plan and the work that we're doing. So looking at the next steps for the budget. So looking at those projected revenues, there's still a couple items that are big that are not available yet. So looking at that, staffing and non-staffing costs, as Paul mentioned, we'll be looking at our 5-year budgets, making sure those are updated and available for the 4-year budget. Reevaluation of the fund balance projections. So I'll comb through all of that data again and just make sure we're ready to go for the budget adoption. Balancing everything, just fine tuning to make sure that we're able to meet our goals and objectives, and also maintain that financial stability and transparency. Looking at our other funds, and then preparing the budget for OSPI and the public, and then the budget hearing and adoption in August, which looks like that. This looks a lot nicer than the actual work that goes into it. If this is what it felt like, that'd be great. Any questions?
I guess I do have one. When you showed this slide with the projections of FTE and classified headcounts over 5 years and declining enrollment, if you simply look at the numbers and look at proportionality, I'm assuming you're using a funding formula. And it would seem to me that if the resources per student stayed the same, we would have a lower head count across 5 years. So I believe you're looking at a situation where we're providing different and more intensive education for a different mix of students, and that formula also provides more dollars. Is that correct?
So the formula really drives the staffing units. It doesn't necessarily drive the dollars within the building. So when I was projecting out those staffing units, I was looking at, okay, our enrollment at the elementaries is going down, I'll just say 100 students. So, you know, a higher average class size might be 20. So that means on average, maybe we'll be reducing about 5 staff. That was kind of the level that I was at.
Okay.
Just
No, I didn't capture that. I thought of it in terms of which kind of education they're in rather than which grade they're in, because you've got the same factor, you've got a different ratio. Okay, thanks. I did miss that.
Maria, I know you're back. Anything?
No, I'm good. Just listening in.
Okay,
Thank you.
that is what we have for the board today. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Nice job, Jeanette.
Thank you very much, everybody.
There's a